There is a truth we have all felt in our own skin. The times we have most betrayed ourselves were not because of the blows of fate, but because of the concessions we gave when we did not want to give them, for every yes that came out of our mouth while our soul screamed no. For every moment in which we allowed the fear of rejection, criticism, or abandonment to weigh more than the peace of our own heart. It is not others who completely break us. It is we ourselves who shatter when we give away what we should never have surrendered. Every boundary you fail to set becomes a crack. At first it seems small, agreeing to a favor you did not want to do, answering a message that did not deserve your time, staying when your body begged you to leave. But that crack repeats itself, grows, multiplies, and one day you wake up drained, directionless, feeling that your life has been more in the hands of others than in your own. The worst part is that it was almost never a real obligation. It was you who yielded out of habit, who confused kindness with sacrifice, who confused patience with submission. We live as if respect were earned at the cost of our own dignity. We were taught to please, to be useful, to avoid making waves. But what no one tells you is that living to please everyone is the surest way to lose yourself. What good is it to receive approval if, in the end, you pay for it with your freedom? What value does applause have if behind all the noise you are left exhausted and empty? Guilt has become the sharpest weapon against ourselves. When we try to set a boundary, guilt whispers that we are selfish, that we are failing, that we have no right to take care of ourselves, and then we give in again. Guilty if we say no. Guilty if we say yes. Guilty even for wanting to rest. It is an invisible trap that ties us to others, while our life slips away in promises and responsibilities we never truly wanted. Seneca, who knew power up close and human fragility more than he wished, wrote that life expands for those who know how to use it, but slips away from the fingers of those who waste it on what does not belong to them. That is the heart of the problem. Every time you fail to set a boundary, you are giving away time that will never return. And if time is the most valuable thing we have, every yes without desire is a slow form of suicide. This is not about becoming harsh, cold, or insensitive. It is not about building walls to shut out the world. Setting boundaries without guilt is an act of respect, not selfishness. It is the recognition that you can only give generously if you first take care of who you are. A river that overflows destroys. A river that runs within its banks nourishes the earth. Boundaries are those banks. They do not destroy. They allow what flows within you to preserve its strength and reach further. Many believe that boundaries hurt relationships, but the truth is the opposite. Healthy boundaries protect the bond, give it order, and make it more just. Because when you always say yes, the relationship becomes poisoned with resentment. When you learn to say no, the relationship breathes sincerity. Affection without boundaries wears out. Affection with boundaries is purified. Think of the days you lived drained from pleasing. Think of the moments when your heart knew you should not have agreed, yet you did. That memory weighs heavy, and yet it can also become the starting point. Because just as the habit of yielding is learned, so too is the habit of protecting your time and your energy. You were not born without boundaries. They were stripped away from you by habits and silences, and now it is up to you to reclaim them. The art of setting boundaries without guilt is also the art of governing yourself. The Stoics called it the hegemonikon, the ruling center of the mind, the part of you that must never be enslaved by passions or external pressures. When you say yes to everything, you hand your hegemonikon to anyone who knocks at your door. When you learn to say no, you take it back. You reclaim your inner citadel, that invincible fortress Marcus Aurelius spoke of, where no one may enter without your permission. And here comes the harshest reflection. If you do not set your own boundaries, someone else will do it for you, and almost never will they do it thinking of your good. He who cannot say no soon becomes a tool of another's desire. Seneca warned that a slave is not only one who is chained, but one who lives at the mercy of another's will. And how many live like this, with invisible chains made of compliance, fear, and guilt? But you are not condemned to repeat that cycle. Just as today you can recognize the wound, today you can also begin to heal it. Every boundary you set is an act of freedom. Every no you pronounce with serenity is a yes to your own life, and every time you choose to protect your time, you are training the virtue of temperance, the virtue that allows you to live without being drained by the useless. Today's session will be a deep journey to learn how to recover that strength, not from arrogance or anger, but from clarity. Because boundaries are not war barricades, they are borders of peace. And those who learn to defend them without guilt discover something essential, that respect begins with oneself, and that only those who respect themselves can teach others to do the same. Today we are going to dismantle the idea that setting boundaries is selfish. We are going to show that it is, in fact, an act of justice, justice toward yourself and toward those around you, because no one can ask you for authentic love if it comes from a heart that is exhausted. No one can demand your presence if you give it at the cost of losing yourself. Boundaries do not pull you away from others. They preserve you so you can give the best of yourself. So open your eyes like one waking from a long sleep. Look at the places where you always yielded. Look at the wounds left behind by your unnecessary yeses. And listen to the Stoic voice that for 2,000 years has repeated, "What does not depend on you, accept. What depends on you, protect firmly." Your boundaries depend on you, and today, perhaps for the first time in a long time, it is time to set them without guilt. Before we begin, I want you to declare your commitment by leaving in the comments, "From today, I set boundaries without guilt." That phrase will serve as a reminder that you are here to protect your peace, your time, and your dignity. It is an act of justice toward yourself, not selfishness. This is the moment to prove to yourself that you do not need permission to guard what matters, your inner life. Without further ado, let us begin. First Stoic lesson: justice begins with you. When we think of justice, we usually look outward: laws, judges, punishments, rewards. But justice, in its deepest root, does not begin in courts or assemblies, but within yourself. You cannot be just with the world if you are not first just with yourself. And yet, how often do we forget this? How often do we give away everything we have, even what we should not give, while neglecting what is essential: our peace, our time, our rest? The most common injustice is not the one others do to us, but the one we do to ourselves. Every time we give up our voice to sustain someone else's, every time we sacrifice our well-being to feed another's expectation, we are committing a silent betrayal. Epictetus said it bluntly: "It is not what happens to us, but how we interpret it that harms us." And often that interpretation comes from a lack of justice toward ourselves. We believe we do not deserve to say no, that it is not right to defend ourselves, that the proper thing is to please, even at the cost of our dignity. Justice toward yourself is not selfishness, it is balance. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, summed it up in a brief phrase: "Do what is in harmony with your nature." And what is that nature? That of a human being who possesses reason, will, and dignity. If you live always to satisfy others, you betray that nature. If you never set boundaries, you are not being good. You are being unjust with yourself, and in time, unjust also with those around you, because no one can give what they do not have. Imagine for a moment that your life is a balance. On one side is what you give: your time, your effort, your listening, your company. On the other side is what you keep for yourself: your rest, your silence, your projects, your health. When the scale tilts too far outward, injustice is born, and that injustice soon bears fruit: extreme exhaustion, irritability, hidden resentment, nameless sadness. What is the point of giving yourself to the entire world if you do it from a place that is broken, empty, worn out? Seneca warned in his letters to Lucilius, "No one can live well if he does not judge himself every day." Justice begins there, in that intimate examination. Today did I treat myself with the same consideration with which I treated others? Today did I respect my limits as much as I respected another's? Today did I listen to my needs, or did I silence them to avoid conflict? Justice that is not practiced inward is only appearance outward. The paradox is that when we are not just with ourselves, we end up harming those we intended to please, because constant sacrifice turns into resentment. And resentment, sooner or later, leaks out in harsh words, in sharp gestures, in distances that wound. The apparent kindness of never saying no ends up transforming into a much greater injustice. You make promises you cannot keep, sustain bonds that feel like chains, offer affection that becomes poison. Justice toward yourself is also justice toward others. When you say this far and no further, you are not rejecting the other. You are protecting the only thing that can guarantee a healthy relationship, your integrity. And that integrity, like the air, goes unnoticed while it is present, but as soon as it is lost, it poisons everything. There is a silent injustice that often goes unnoticed, the one in which you become your own executioner. It is the injustice of overloading yourself so as not to disappoint, of silencing your voice to uphold others, of clothing yourself in smiles when inside you are burning with exhaustion. How many times did you say yes, knowing it was a no? How many times did your body beg for rest, but your fear of judgment pushed you on? This is the territory where the Stoic must lift his gaze and stop. Seneca, who knew the fragility of time like few others, wrote with a force that echoes through the centuries. It is not that we have little time, but that we waste much. We waste when we do not know how to defend what belongs to us. We waste when we believe virtue lies in pleasing without measure, but the truth is that virtue lies in discernment. Justice toward yourself is recognizing which external demands are just and which are abusive, which elevate you and which drain you. Stoic practice proposes something simple and radical: examine your consent. Epictetus repeated it. Nothing external has power over you unless you give it your assent. But here lies the trap. Too often we assent out of fear. We assent to avoid conflict, to escape being judged as cold or selfish, to maintain approval. And in that act we hand over the key to our freedom. Saying no is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of justice toward your reason and your dignity. Marcus Aurelius expressed it in his Meditations. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts. If every day you think your voice does not matter, that your needs are secondary, that your worth depends on what you give, little by little your soul will take on the color of submission. But if you remember that justice begins with you, your thoughts will take on another color, the serene firmness of temperance that knows how to say enough without hatred, the prudence that distributes time and energy with wisdom. There is a frequent mistake, believing that justice toward oneself is selfishness. But selfishness is taking from another what does not belong to you. Justice is protecting what is yours so you can give it authentically. A parent who never rests cannot raise with patience. A worker who never cares for himself cannot perform with clarity. A person who never says no ends up offering half-heartedly with hidden resentment. Justice toward yourself is the only guarantee of true giving. The practice begins in the everyday. Ask yourself at the end of the day, what decisions did I make today that made me feel whole, and which made me feel betrayed by myself? That inventory is more valuable than any bank account because it shows you where you are spending the only currency that cannot be regained, your time. Seneca repeated it again and again. The greatest waste of life is postponement. We postpone our care, we postpone respect for ourselves, we postpone the no we should have spoken, and in that postponement we give away justice. Justice begins with you because, without it, everything else collapses. If you do not learn to treat yourself with respect, you will end up demanding from the world a recognition that never comes. If you do not learn to guard your time, you will end up resenting others for thefts you yourself allowed. And if you do not learn to say enough, every relationship will become a prison built with your own silences. It is not an easy path because it means dismantling deep-seated beliefs, but it is the only path that returns dignity to you. By practicing this first lesson, you begin to live from a different place, no longer from guilt, but from justice. And true justice, the kind that begins within you, always expands outward to others. Second Stoic lesson, saying no is also a virtue. Saying no is one of the hardest tests for any human being. Not because the word itself is complicated, but because it carries centuries of conditioning, beliefs, and fears intertwined with our need to belong. From childhood we are taught that saying yes makes us good, kind, and lovable, that agreeing is a sign of obedience and obedience guarantees affection. What happens then? We grow up confusing kindness with compliance, virtue with submission, love with self-denial. Stoicism offers us a beacon in the midst of this confusion. Seneca wrote, "He who obeys everyone truly serves no one." Because a yes that contradicts your reason is not an act of virtue but of weakness. It does not strengthen the other, nor does it strengthen you. On the contrary, it strips you of your integrity. When you say yes to something that goes against your well-being, what you give is not love. It is a broken part of yourself that sooner or later will exact its toll. The Stoic no is not violent, cruel, or arrogant. It is sober, firm, silent. It is a wall that rises without the need for shouting because it is born from inner clarity. Epictetus insisted that nothing external could compel us without our consent, and the most betrayed consent is the one we give in haste, out of fear, with the obsession of not losing others' approval. But to pause and pronounce a no, grounded in reason, is, in itself, an act of freedom. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily in his meditations, "Tranquility comes from doing what is just, and sometimes what is just is to say no. Because what is just is not always what pleases. What is just is not always what brings immediate gratification. What is just is what preserves the harmony of the soul, and when you say no to a request you know will corrupt you, exhaust you excessively, or pull you away from what is essential, you are safeguarding that harmony. What is interesting is how we react after saying no. In most cases, we accompany it with guilt. A guilt that feels like a weight in the chest, a whisper in the mind repeating, "You failed, you disappointed, you lost affection." But Stoicism teaches us to reinterpret those voices. That guilt is nothing more than habit protesting when you change the script, and every true change is uncomfortable at first. Saying no is like starting a new training. Your muscles ache, your body resists, but little by little strength appears. The real question we should ask ourselves is not, what will others think of my no, but what will happen to me if I keep saying yes to what destroys me? Because that is the hidden cost we rarely calculate. The cost of accepting draining commitments, exhausting relationships, crushing tasks, and we pay it in the most expensive currency: time, energy, peace. When you manage to see no as an act of virtue, something shifts. You no longer speak it with fear or shame, but with the serenity of one who acts in accordance with reason. You stop feeling guilty and start feeling just. Just toward yourself because you respect yourself, just toward others because you give what you can without resentment. Justice, as we saw in the first lesson, begins within you, and no is one of its clearest expressions. There is one detail we often overlook. Every time we say yes against our will, we open the door for someone else to define the course of our life. That person does not need to be a tyrant or have bad intentions. It is enough that we hand over our will wrapped in a compliant gesture. It is as if we gave away pieces of our time to anyone passing by, without measuring the value of what we offer. And time, as Seneca reminded us, is not little but much of what we waste. When someone asks you for something, you can pause for a moment and ask yourself, does this bring me closer to the life I want to live, or does it pull me away from it? That pause is fundamental because within it virtue breathes. The Stoic does not act out of impulse nor out of fear of rejection. He acts guided by reason. If your reason tells you that accepting will harm your peace, then your duty is to refuse, not in defiance of the other, but in loyalty to yourself. Because the true tribunal you will answer to is not the gaze of others, but your own conscience. Now then, let us not confuse the virtuous no with childish rebellion or with pride. It is not about saying no to everything or building walls in every interaction. Stoicism does not propose isolation or total indifference, but clarity. The virtuous no rests on one principle. If something threatens my integrity, I must draw a line. But if something does not harm me and on the contrary allows me to serve, to love, to grow, then yes is also an act of virtue. The key is in distinguishing, and distinguishing requires calm, reflection, inward gaze. Epictetus said that no one can compel us to assent to what our reason rejects. That phrase should be written on every door we hesitate to enter, because most of our yeses do not arise from conviction, but from fear. Fear of losing affection, fear of being alone, fear of being seen as selfish. But is it not more selfish to say yes and then accumulate resentment? Is it not more destructive to accept and then silently blame the other, instead of having set a boundary from the start? No is in truth a form of love. Love for yourself because it preserves your serenity. Love for the other because it gives clarity and avoids fueling false expectations. A forced yes never builds anything healthy. It is like counterfeit currency. It circulates for a time, but in the end destroys trust. A sincere no, by contrast, may hurt in the moment, but it opens space for more authentic relationships. Transparency is a gift, even if it sometimes feels harsh. The Stoic path will not demand immediate perfection from you. You may say yes many more times before daring to speak the no you have long held back. But each attempt matters. Each time you choose not to yield to what you know does not belong to you, you strengthen your character. And thus, no ceases to be a wall you fear to raise and becomes a bridge toward your true life. Think of the image of an archer. If he shoots at everything that moves, he wastes his arrows and never hits the target. But if he takes careful aim, if he decides what is worth it, then every shot has meaning. Your energy, your time, your peace, these are your arrows. No is the discipline that keeps you from squandering them. Seneca warned that no one can give us back lost time. And it is true. Every yes uttered without conviction is a piece of life that will not return. But every no spoken with clarity is an act of justice toward yourself. And within that justice lies the seed of a life free of invisible chains. That is why saying no is not selfishness. It is virtue. It is prudence, temperance, courage. It is the reminder that you are not here to be a slave to others' desires, but to live in accordance with your reason, with your logos, with that which makes you human, and not merely a puppet of external noise. Third Stoic lesson: distinguish between what you must and what you choose. We often live trapped in an invisible maze that we reinforce with each step. We confuse what we must do with what others expect us to do and end up mortgaging our lives in the name of a duty we never chose. How many times do you say yes to commitments you don't want simply because you have to? How many times do you carry the guilt of feeling that if you don't meet every demand placed on you, you are somehow less valuable? This is the root of a trap that slowly consumes inner strength. Believing that everything placed before you is an obligation, when in truth many of those things are just someone else's chains, disguised as responsibility. The Stoics understood this with brutal clarity. Epictetus summed it up in a phrase that seems carved in stone. Remember that you are an actor in a play whose script was written by another. What does this mean? That there are duties we do not choose, being born into a family, belonging to a city, having certain conditions we did not decide. These are roles we must play, and we should perform them with dignity. But it is very different to confuse those unavoidable duties with the endless demands others impose on us, with social expectations that only divert us from our essence. That is where choice enters. And choice, when exercised with virtue, is what makes a person free. Seneca saw this every day in the Roman court, surrounded by the powerful who constantly asked for words, counsel, favors, endless speeches. He learned that one cannot live by answering everything and being available to everyone without destroying oneself. In one of his letters he warned, "Life is not short, but we make it so." And we do this precisely when we confuse real duties with those artificial demands that drain us. For the truth is clear, not everything asked of you is an obligation, not everything expected of you is a command. Knowing how to distinguish is what defines whether you live ruled or whether you rule your own destiny. Imagine an ordinary day. The phone rings and someone asks you for a favor you know will rob you of hours of rest. At work, they pile a task on you that isn't yours, but you accept it out of fear of being poorly regarded. At home, someone insists you change your plans to fit theirs. And with each decision, however small, you move one step away from what you truly should be doing, caring for your health, your peace, your time, your path. The result is deep exhaustion, silent resentment, a life that doesn't feel like your own. Why does this happen? Because you don't distinguish between duty and choice, because you struggle to say no, and because you confuse prudence with submission. For the Stoics, true duty looks very different. It is what arises from reason, what is connected to virtue, to fulfill justice, temperance, courage, and prudence, to honor promises freely made, to keep your word given consciously, to care for those who legitimately depend on you, a child, a friend who trusted you, a community you belong to. Everything else can be rejected without guilt, because if it does not flow from virtue, it is not duty, it is noise, pressure, manipulation. And that noise can devour your entire life if you do not learn to draw the line with clarity. Marcus Aurelius practiced this even as emperor. He faced thousands of voices clamoring for his attention, and yet each morning he devoted time to writing for himself, reminding himself of what was essential and what was not. That habit was his way of distinguishing. He governed an empire, but he never ceased first to govern himself. That is the example he leaves us. No one is so bound by duties that he cannot choose his attitude, his boundaries, and his way of responding. Here is a practical exercise for you. Every time you face a request, pause and ask yourself with brutal honesty, does this arise from an authentic duty, or is it just an expectation someone else is imposing on me? If it is true duty, do it with dignity. If it is a disguised imposition, remember that your choice is the wall that protects your life. That distinction is the blade that separates freedom from servitude. If there is a confusion that most wounds the human spirit, it is that mixture of what we must do and what we choose. It is not uncommon for someone to live trapped, fulfilling commitments that never pass through the filter of their own will. Suddenly, hours are spent in meetings where nothing is learned, in favors no one thanks, in appearances heavier than one's own body. The result is a mortgaged life, always running after what others demand, never stopping to ask which of those things respond to true duty and which are merely fear of rejection. The Stoics drew this line clearly. They said, what you must do is born of nature and of your role in life. What you choose is what you decide to invest your energy in, what you freely embrace because it aligns with your reason. If you confuse the first with the second, you become a slave. For then, any whim of another turns into an order, and any external expectation is disguised as an obligation. Seneca warned his friend Lucilius that most people live as perpetual debtors, always trying to please, always explaining why they couldn't fulfill 100 commitments. And what is the root of that anxiety? That they never learn to discriminate. They mistook for duty what was, in truth, choice. No one is obliged to answer every message immediately, to accept every invitation, to justify every step. Yet the fearful mind convinces itself that it must, that if it says no, there will be irreparable consequences. And so life is spent paying installments on a debt we never signed. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reminded himself, "Do what is fitting as a citizen, as a father, as a human being, but do not surrender your soul to others' theatres." By this he meant that there is a difference between what life truly requires of us, fulfilling our roles with justice, and what others try to impose on us, being actors in their personal drama. Each day, when we accept without discernment, we betray that distinction. The Stoic practice here is simple in form, but difficult in execution. Every time you face a request, ask yourself first whether it is a duty or a choice. Duty arises from the role you freely assumed. Being a parent implies caring. Being a worker implies providing a service. Being a friend implies sustaining trust. That is not negotiable. But choice is another matter. Whether you attend a party, whether you reply immediately, whether you give your time to projects that build nothing, and here the soul must become firm. You can say no. You can choose not to invest your energy there. Epictetus was uncompromising about this. Remember that you are an actor in a play whose script you did not write, but your role you play with dignity. What does that mean? That you do not decide the existence of certain duties. You were born a child, a citizen, a sibling, but you do decide how to act in each scene, what words to speak, what gestures to make. That freedom allows you to say, "This far and no further. This I do, because it is my role. This I refuse, because it does not belong to my part." Do not forget, the wise man does not flee from duties, but neither does he chain himself to false obligations. He lives in the just middle, fulfilling what nature and reason demand, and choosing carefully what to devote his time to. For time is the most precious currency. Wasting it on invented obligations is the worst fraud one can commit against oneself. Fourth, Stoic lesson: suspend the fear of external judgment. The fear of external judgment is like a shadow that follows every step, a ghost that sits at the table, that invades your decisions and steals the air of your freedom. No matter how strong you think you are, if you don't examine it, this fear seeps into daily life. From the clothes you choose to the words you swallow, from the projects you reject to the ones you accept unwillingly. It is an invisible prison, but real. And the cruelest part is that the key to get out is in your hand, though you don't use it. The Stoics knew that the fear of others' opinions is one of the heaviest chains of the soul. Epictetus described it bluntly. If you want to improve, be prepared to be laughed at, to be insulted, to be told you've lost the best of your life. He said this because philosophy, like the act of living freely, always unsettles those who are still enslaved to applause. If you let the external voice decide your path, you no longer govern your life. You are governed by the crowd. And what is external judgment if not noise? One says you are cold, another that you are weak, another that you are harsh, another that you are too kind. No one ever reaches consensus. If you try to please all those mirrors, you shatter into 1,000 fragments and end up without your own face. Marcus Aurelius, in his war retreat, reminded himself, "We lose more time worrying about what others think than attending to what depends on us." And that phrase cuts deep. Every minute spent guessing at others' opinions is time stolen from your task, your calm, your character. The paradox is that external judgment never ceases. Even if you do what is right, someone will criticize it. Even if you live with austerity, they will call it stinginess. Even if you are generous, they will say you seek approval. There is no way to silence the chorus. So, what alternative remains? Suspend the fear. That does not mean not listening. It means hearing without being dominated. It means filtering what is useful and letting pass what is not. Seneca illustrated it with a brief counsel: It matters far more what you think of yourself than what others think of you. The strength of that phrase lies in placing the tribunal inside you, not outside. If you judge yourself with honesty, if you know you acted according to reason and virtue, the external noise becomes a powerless echo. And the curious thing is that those who learn to live this way end up being more respected, because respect is never begged. It is inspired when someone stands firm in what they believe to be just. But here lies the practical dilemma. How do you suspend that fear when it feels so natural? Because it is not about flipping a switch, it is training. The first step is to notice every time you act for the sake of appearances, every time you say yes to avoid conflict, every time you stay silent out of fear of criticism, every time you display something only to gain approval. Identify those gestures. Philosophy begins with awareness. The second step is to test your resistance. Dare to a small act of freedom. Dress simply, even when the environment clamors for luxury. Remain silent in a conversation where you would once have sought to shine. Answer calmly in a place where they expect your anger. These experiments train the muscle that does not depend on others. And the third step is to remember the inevitable. No one controls the opinions of others. You can be the most virtuous and still be criticized. So, what sense does it make to mortgage your peace for something that will never be in your hands? As Epictetus repeated, there are things within your control and things not. Make the division and you will be free. The fear of external judgment is, in the end, a mirage. It looks like a wall, but it is only air. The solidity is given by you, with your attention and your anxiety. When you withdraw from that impossible battle, the battle of trying to please everyone, you discover there is space for a life more sober, more lucid, more your own. If you look closely, you will realize that much of your anxiety is not born from what actually happens to you, but from the film you imagine in the minds of others. You get up and think, what will they say if I dress like this? What will they think if I refuse this invitation? How will it sound if I say I don't want to be there? Each of these questions is a chain that weighs not on the body, but on the soul. It is a way of handing your freedom to an invisible jury. Stoicism invites you to dismantle that trap, and the method begins with a radical act, to recognize that others' opinions are uncontrollable. You can be generous and some will interpret it as self-interest. You can be quiet and someone will call it pride. You can be firm and another will see it as harshness. This diversity of judgment shows that the truth is not in them, but in you. The multiplicity of voices proves that the only tribunal that matters is your own reason. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself each morning that the world would be full of meddlers, ingrates, the envious, and the aggressive. He did not do this to grow resentful, but to vaccinate his spirit against surprise. If you already know they will judge you, why fear what is natural in mankind? Your task is not to control their mouths, but to educate your response. Seneca also anticipated the attack with a practical resource. He wrote about fame as a burden that distorts more than it helps. He accepted that one could not prevent opinion, but taught not to swell with it or be depressed by it. He said, "No one is unhappy for not being admired, except the one who seeks admiration." That phrase holds a remedy. If you stop begging for approval, you stop suffering from its absence. Now, suspending the fear of judgment does not mean becoming stone. It is not about ignoring everyone and locking yourself away. The wise man listens, but is not enslaved. He filters what is useful advice, distinguishes what is well-founded criticism, and discards what is mere rumor. That is the difference between closing off and standing firm. The first is a fragile wall that ends up isolated. The second is a solid rock that opens only to what nourishes. In daily life, this translates into small practices. When someone judges you, breathe and ask, "Does what they think depend on me?" If the answer is no, withdraw your attention. When you feel the impulse to please, to avoid comments, ask yourself, Does this action honor my reason or only seek applause? If you discover the latter, correct your course. Over time, these tiny habits transform the structure of your spirit. The key lies in accepting that living with fear of judgment is living with your time and character mortgaged, because every time you deviate to please, you renounce being just with yourself. And there, justice, as the first lesson taught, begins to crumble. You cannot pretend to be virtuous if you live dependent on applause. You cannot aspire to freedom if you rely on public opinion. Suspending the fear of external judgment is not a one-time act, but a daily practice. It is like tempering steel. With each hammer blow, with each exposure to fire and water, the blade is reinforced. You strengthen yourself each time you choose to act according to your logos, rather than yielding to the echo of others' voices. That repetition turns what today is effort into tomorrow's habit. And the most beautiful part is that when you live this way, you inspire without intending to. Whoever sees you firm in your decisions, even if they do not always agree, learns that there is another way to live. Your example teaches that dignity weighs more than approval, and that serene silence is worth more than 1,000 justifications. That is what it means to lead through virtue, not to impose, but to show with constancy. In the end, the question is clear. Do you want to spend your whole life in the theater of masks, or would you rather inhabit your own face? External judgment is fleeting, changing shape with every wind. Your character, however, can be rock if you choose to anchor it in virtue. That is the Stoic's task. To live in such a way that, even surrounded by criticism, you need no justification because you already know your path is straight. Fifth, Stoic lesson: boundaries protect your logos. Every time you say yes when your soul is screaming no, you're not only giving away your time, you are also giving away your center. That core the Stoics called hegemonikon, the inner fortress from which every free decision is born, erodes when your boundaries are crossed without defense. And the most unsettling part is that it rarely happens all at once. It isn't a frontal assault, but a slow leak. A request accepted out of obligation, a favor granted without strength, a promise made hastily out of fear of conflict. Grain by grain your logos dissolves into the will of others. Seneca warned that lack of measure is the enemy of virtue. What harms you is not only the external weight, but also the internal concession that becomes habit. For the one who never trains himself to set boundaries ends up being dragged like a ship without an anchor. Yet setting boundaries does not always mean confrontation. Sometimes a clear phrase is enough, other times a firm silence. The essential point is that it comes from your reason, not from fear. Boundaries, far from being walls, are structures that uphold your life. Just as a riverbed prevents a river from overflowing and losing itself, boundaries protect your energy, your time, and your dignity from being drained by external demands. Logos is not just theory, it is the power to direct your life according to what is just, prudent, and virtuous. Each concession without measure weakens it. Each boundary calmly placed strengthens it. Epictetus put it starkly: he who gives himself up to the power of another loses his own. And that power is not lost only in visible chains, but also in the subtle ones. Fear of someone's displeasure, the desperate search for approval, the impulse to save others at the expense of your peace. Practicing boundaries is learning to recognize where your responsibility ends and another's begins. If you try to carry what does not belong to you, you do not help, you destroy. But how do you recognize when you are giving more than is just? The body knows before the mind. There is a peculiar fatigue, a constant irritation, a quiet resentment. These are signs that your yes was not free but imposed. The Stoic does not ignore these signals. He examines them as symptoms of a fracture in the logos, for when your reason betrays itself, the price is the loss of peace. In daily life, training boundaries means observing the small things, saying, "I can't right now," instead of forcing a yes, accepting that not every problem belongs to you, recognizing that time given to a meaningless commitment is time stolen from what truly matters. They are humble exercises, but transformative ones. Every boundary set strengthens your hegemonicon, like a muscle that grows with each repetition. And here lies the paradox. When you set boundaries, at first you generate discomfort. Others, accustomed to your constant concessions, may react with surprise, even rejection. But that discomfort is the price of authenticity. It is a natural filter. Those who truly value you will respect your border. Those who don't will drift away. Either way, your logos remains protected. A boundary is not selfishness, it is justice. For being just with yourself does not separate you from others. It prepares you to serve them better. No one can give serenity if they live exhausted. No one can offer clarity if they are buried in resentment. Setting boundaries does not reduce your capacity to love, it purifies it. And here lies the core of this Stoic lesson. Every time you say no from reason, you are saying yes to your logos, to your center, to your very life. Imagine your life as a fortress. Its walls are not meant to isolate you from the world, but to keep what is essential safe. Every time you give in to what you should not, you open a crack in that wall. It may seem small, but it lets in dampness, erosion, decay. In time, the wall falls not from a great blow, but from the leaks you never sealed. That is the image of living without boundaries, a life in ruins on the inside, though it may look intact from the outside. Marcus Aurelius insisted that nothing should enter your soul without your consent. You can live surrounded by voices, demands, even aggressions, and still preserve calm if you protect your inner self. But that calm does not arise from a natural gift, but from constant training, learning to discern what to accept and what to reject. A boundary is that filter. It lets in what builds you up and blocks what corrodes. Without it, you end up at anyone's mercy. One of the most common traps is confusing kindness with the absence of boundaries. You think that always saying yes makes you good, when in fact it makes you invisible. No one respects the person who does not respect themselves, and respect is born from the clarity with which you hold your space, your word, your time. Seneca warned that life is wasted more by self-imposed distractions than by inevitable losses. Every boundary set is, at its core, a way to reclaim life you would otherwise give away unconsciously. It is not about hardening yourself into stone or living with a permanent no on your lips. It is about choosing with prudence. A boundary is, in reality, a larger yes. Yes to your peace. Yes to your dignity. Yes to your purpose. That is why it is not a wall, but a channel. Whoever learns to set them discovers that their love becomes more genuine, because it no longer arises from obligation, but from freedom. Giving without resentment is giving in fullness. Now, look closely at one complete day of yours. How many times did you accept something just to avoid conflict? How many words did you speak that you didn't want to? How much time did you give to a commitment you knew was empty? Those hours will not return, and yet you gave them away out of fear. A boundary is the discipline of stopping that waste. It is telling yourself, my life is not currency to be spent in the marketplace of applause. Epictetus would push it further. He who does not belong to himself is a slave to all. And that slavery often goes unnoticed because it has no physical chains. It is made of promises you don't want to keep, smiles that drain you, silences that suffocate you. Breaking those chains begins with one small decision, daring to mark the border. The first time it hurts, the second time it relieves, the third time it frees. That is why a boundary is also a pedagogy for the other. When you say no with firmness, you teach the other not to abuse. When you keep silent instead of justifying yourself again and again, you educate in respect. When you hold your border without aggression, you create a cleaner space of coexistence. A boundary, then, is not only defense, it is also teaching. Ultimately, protecting your logos through boundaries is not an act against the world, but an act for your life. It does not pull you away from others. It draws you closer in a more authentic way. It allows you to sit at the table without resentment, to help without exhaustion, to love without losing yourself. Whoever learns this lesson discovers that boundaries do not divide, they order. And in that order, your hegemonicon breathes and strengthens. Thus is fulfilled the Stoic paradox. The firmer you are in your boundaries, the freer you are in your giving. For you know that what you give is yours, not a concession torn from you. And in that act, your logos remains invulnerable, serene, clear, and master of itself. Sixth Stoic lesson: silence can be a boundary. Noise is one of the most common forms of invasion, and I don't just mean physical noise, but the noise of words that demand you respond, explain, justify yourself. From childhood we are taught that silence is suspicious, that silence is emptiness, that whoever doesn't respond loses. But the Stoic learns the opposite. There are battles won not with a brilliant argument, but with the pause that interrupts the game. Silence, used wisely, is an invisible and powerful boundary. Think of how many times you've fallen into the trap of defending yourself against unfair accusations, explaining yourself again and again to calm someone else's anxiety, justifying yourself until exhausted just to be understood. And still, the discomfort never disappeared. On the contrary, your fatigue grew, along with the feeling you had given up too much. Silence is the antidote, a reminder that not everything deserves a reply, not every provocation needs an echo, not every demand is legitimate. Seneca said that most arguments are a useless waste of breath. To argue with someone unwilling to listen is like blowing against the wind. You lose energy and nothing changes. There, silence becomes the boundary that breaks the chain. If you don't feed the fire with wood, the flame dies. Likewise, if you don't feed the provocation with your response, it fades away. But we must not confuse this silence with submission. It is not resignation or weakness. It is the decision not to place your voice where it won't be received with justice. It is an act of temperance, holding back your words until they are useful. Stoic silence is active, not passive. It is like a sheathed sword, not because it cannot be used, but because you choose the right moment. In daily life, silence can serve as a boundary in many ways. When someone demands explanations they have no right to, silence protects your privacy. When someone provokes you with insults, silence preserves your peace. When gossip spreads, silence prevents you from being complicit. In each of these cases, silence is an invisible wall that marks where external demands end and your inner freedom begins. Marcus Aurelius trained himself in this discipline. In his meditations, he repeated that words should be few and necessary, like medicine measured in proper doses. He wrote that external noise should never penetrate his soul. This training was not accidental. In the imperial court, every word misspoken could cost him reputation or life. His silence was a boundary that kept him safe without failing to act when it was necessary. Epictetus also put it simply: if someone provokes you, remember it is only sound until you decide to give it meaning. There lies the key to the boundary. You decide whether external words enter your citadel or die outside. Silence is the closed gate that protects your logos from intruders. This silence also carries a pedagogical effect. When you do not respond to manipulation, the manipulator loses power. When you do not justify what is obvious, you teach that your dignity is not up for debate. When you do not rush to fill the void of a dead conversation, you show that your presence is enough. Silence then ceases to be absence and becomes an invisible teacher. Yet learning it is not easy. The impulse to explain is strong because we fear being misunderstood. But what is worth more, your serenity or a moment of approval? The Stoic chooses the first, not because he despises others, but because he understands that dignity cannot be put up for auction. Silence, used with wisdom, not only protects you, it also transforms dynamics of power. Think of an ordinary interrogation when someone insists on extracting an immediate answer. Silence, prolonged calmly, forces the other to face their own anxiety. There appears the paradox. The one who is silent controls the rhythm. The one who waits sets the frame. The Stoic understands that mastery of speech includes mastery of its absence. In politics, in courts, in public life, silences have changed destinies. Seneca knew this well. His life was surrounded by intrigue, accusations, and suspicion. Every phrase could be used against him, every gesture amplified by Nero's court. He learned that silence was not cowardice, but self-preservation, and more than that, a reminder that the essential is not proven in speeches, but in deeds. This principle still applies today. How many times do we get trapped in endless arguments that drain us and solve nothing? There, the Stoic philosophy offers a practice. Ask yourself, before speaking, whether your words will change the outcome. If the answer is no, your silence is worth more than any argument. The power of silence lies in giving you back control over yourself. Instead of reacting automatically, you choose to pause. In that pause, there is room for reflection. What is this situation really asking of me? Is it an attack I must stop firmly, or just noise I can let pass? Silence is not renunciation. It is the interval in which you choose wisely. Marcus Aurelius emphasized that pause. In his journal he wrote, "The best revenge is not to resemble the one who offends you." And how do you avoid resembling them? By not returning shout for shout, insult for insult. That interval of silence is the invisible wall that separates you from the vicious cycle of reaction, and that wall is freedom. Silence also has a profound effect on your inner life. When you stop filling every moment with words, something more valuable arises: listening. You hear the other's true intention. You hear your own mind without distractions. You hear nature reminding you that everything flows. Epictetus said that philosophy begins with listening, not with speaking. In this sense, silence is not only a boundary outward, but an opening inward. Applied in your relationships, this principle changes everything. If you don't respond immediately to provocation, if you don't justify every decision, if you don't explain what needs no explanation, others begin to measure their words more carefully. Not because you intimidate, but because your calm commands respect. Silent boundaries teach without preaching. Still, silence demands discipline. It is not about holding grudges in silence, nor repressing what must be expressed. The wise boundary is not absolute muteness, but the conscious choice of when to speak and when to be still. As Seneca said, "What is said should be better than silence, otherwise it is better not to speak." That phrase, so simple, contains all Stoic ethics applied to speech. Training yourself in this art is an act of freedom, because modern society pushes us to always respond, to answer instantly, to fill every pause with something. Resisting that pressure is a revolutionary act, remembering you do not always have to be available, nor always justify yourself, nor give explanations you do not owe. Each time you choose silence as a boundary, you reinforce your autonomy and train your serenity. In this way, silence becomes a language of its own, a language that says, "Here is where I stop, here is where my dignity begins," a language that does not need to raise its voice to mark its territory. Silence is firm, serene, consistent with the Stoic idea that the essential is not imposed by shouting, but by the quiet strength of one who knows how to govern himself. Seventh, Stoic lesson: remember your time as a treasure. There is no resource more fragile and easier to lose than time. Gold can be stored, property can be inherited, fame can multiply, but every minute that passes never returns. And yet we treat it as if it were infinite, giving it away without measure to commitments that do not nourish us, to people who consume it without gratitude, to worries that do not even depend on us. Seneca, in his work On the Shortness of Life, put it bluntly: "It is not that we have little time, but that we waste much." That sentence, as harsh as it is precise, is an uncomfortable mirror for each of us. Think about how many times a day you give away your time without noticing. when you accept meetings that make no sense, when you immediately respond to irrelevant messages, when you postpone what matters just to sink into distractions that leave no trace. Each one of these concessions seems small, but together they form a constant leak that drains life of its meaning. Seneca saw in this the greatest waste. Not the mistake of living briefly, but the mistake of living wastefully. Time is the measure of life. Every day given to what does not matter is a piece of you that will never return. Stoic philosophy insists that death is not at the end of the road, but happens daily. Every passing moment is a partial death. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in his meditations, "It is not that we have little life, but that we make little of it." The awareness of this truth should shake us, but we prefer to numb ourselves with the idea that there will be more time tomorrow. The problem is not only external. Many times we are the ones who steal time from ourselves. We let inertia trap us, fear of saying no, guilt for prioritizing what truly matters to us. This is where the importance of boundaries comes in. Saying no is not only an act of protection from others, it is also a defense of your own day. Every time you refuse the unacceptable, you are rescuing minutes, hours, even years of your life that otherwise would have been lost to the trivial. Seneca proposed a simple and brutal exercise. Imagine that every day you receive is a gift you must return at the end of the day with a clear account of what you did with it. Did you invest it in cultivating virtue, in strengthening your reason, in being with those you truly love? Or did you let it dissolve into disputes, trivialities, and excesses you will remember with bitterness tomorrow? That daily audit is the most direct way of regaining awareness of time. The treasure of your time is not measured in quantity, but in quality. There are those who live 80 years as if they were a sigh, always postponing what is essential, always trapped in the tide of the urgent, and there are those who live 40 years with such intensity and coherence that their existence becomes an eternal example. The difference does not lie in the number of days, but in the clarity with which they are used. For the Stoic, the key lies in attention, to live each moment as if it were an unrepeatable gift. That is why remembering your time as a treasure is not an abstract exercise, but a practical training. It means reviewing your commitments, your habits, your relationships. It means asking yourself every morning, what will I spend my day on today? Will it be an investment in what matters or a waste on what drains me? The answer will not always be perfect, but the very act of asking already transforms your relationship with time. Pause for a moment and think. If someone asked you to hand over all your money, you would see it as an insult, an offense, an injustice. You would resist with tooth and nail, and yet when someone asks for your time, an unnecessary call, a shallow conversation, an imposed task that is not yours, you hand it over almost without thinking. How can it be that we defend coins with such zeal and neglect the most valuable treasure we have? This paradox is what Seneca unmasks with bluntness. We are tight-fisted with our possessions, but wasteful with our lives. Time is life in its purest state. It cannot be stored, saved, or recovered. Every passing instant is literally a piece of you dissolving. That is why remembering that your time is a treasure does not mean falling into the anxiety of measuring every second as if it were a debt, but rather living with the awareness that every moment has a weight you can direct toward what truly matters. It is not obsession, it is clarity. The Stoics proposed living with memento mori, the constant reminder that death is near, not to depress, but to focus. When you know your life is finite, you choose more carefully which conversations matter, which battles to fight, which silences to keep. That awareness helps you distinguish the essential from the trivial, what strengthens your soul from what only exhausts it. Seneca also warned that the greatest thief of time is self-deception, postponing what you know you must do, promising yourself you will change tomorrow, letting yourself be carried away by easy distraction. Every delay is a silent pact with mediocrity. That is why training the habit of saying, "I'll do it today," is an act of self-defense. Today I write, today I meditate, today I say no to what robs me, today I embrace the one I love. This today is the only thing that exists. Remember also that valuing your time does not mean becoming rigid or selfish. It means learning to discern. There will be moments when giving your time to someone will be the most virtuous thing. Listening to a suffering friend, accompanying a loved one, teaching someone in need. There, time becomes a noble offering because you give it with intention and love. But it is a very different thing to give it away to noise, to flattery, to empty obligations imposed by others to fill their own voids. The first is virtue, the second is slavery. Stoic training consists of reviewing how you use each day. Marcus Aurelius, even as emperor, noted in his meditations that he must remember to live as if each day were his last. That practice did not paralyze him. It awakened him. It kept him alert so he would not lose himself in the excesses of power, in the distractions of the court, in the vanity of titles. You can do the same. Before you sleep, review in silence how you spent your time. Ask yourself, which part of this day was in my hands and was well used? Where did I let myself be dragged by the trivial, the useless, the external? That self-criticism is the key to regaining control. If your time is a treasure, then every boundary you set is like building a wall to protect it. Saying no ceases to be an uncomfortable act and becomes a declaration of dignity. Because every time you say no to what doesn't add value, you are saying yes to what nourishes you. You are choosing consciously, rescuing your day, practicing the virtue of temperance. And here is something vital. Other people's respect for you begins with the respect you show for your own time. If you do not value your day, no one else will. If you hand out your hours like crumbs, others will take them without a thought. But if you learn to honor them, little by little your surroundings will understand that there is a price in your minutes. Not the price of money, but of value. Whoever respects you, respects your time. Remember this image. Your life is like an amphora full of clear water. Every drop that leaves does not return. You can spill it carelessly until it is empty without realizing it, or you can pour it carefully into the places that bear fruit. The amphora will not be filled again. The only thing you can decide is how you give what it contains. That is the wisdom Seneca wanted to leave us. Do not waste your amphora in the sand. Pour it where it can flourish. Time is your treasure, but recognizing it is not enough. You must protect it. And that only happens if you have the courage to say enough, to choose firmly, to live with the clarity that each day is a loan that must be returned whole. Do not postpone any longer. Do not let noise steal your serenity. Make your time a work of art, not an unfinished draft. 8th Stoic lesson. Choose to be respected rather than approved. How many times have you said yes, just so people wouldn't think badly of you? How many times have you kept silent about your truth, just to avoid making others uncomfortable? How many times have you disguised yourself as something you are not, in order to fit into a group, a relationship, or a job? The price of seeking approval is higher than we realize. It makes us slaves to the gaze of others, puppets moved by invisible strings. Seneca summed it up with lucidity. He who delights in being approved by everyone becomes a servant of everyone. Respect is born from another place, not from pleasing, but from living with coherence, not from trying to be liked by everyone, but from remaining faithful to yourself. Applause is fickle. You have it today, it dissolves tomorrow. Respect, on the other hand, is cultivated in silence, with consistency, with the strength of your decisions repeated over time. It may take longer to arrive, but when it does, it stands like a firm column. The Stoics knew that the judgment of others lies beyond our control. You can act with the best intentions and still be criticized, misunderstood, rejected. That is why they insisted your center must remain in virtue, not in fame. Marcus Aurelius wrote with both bitterness and clarity, "Today you will meet the ungrateful, the insolent, the selfish. but do not let that take away your own goodness. That goodness, that inner coherence, is the seed of true respect, even if not everyone recognizes it. Living in constant pursuit of approval is exhausting. It forces you to mold yourself to the expectations of others, to change masks depending on the audience in front of you. You end up losing yourself in roles, forgetting what your original face looked like. In contrast, when you choose to be respected, you choose a more difficult but more authentic path. To maintain your essence, even when it makes others uncomfortable, even when you are judged. That is the freedom Epictetus defended, to be master of yourself, not of external opinions. Imagine you are in a room full of people and everyone expects you to applaud something you do not agree with. You know that if you don't, you will be seen as the odd one out, the killjoy, the different one. And yet you choose to remain silent, even if it unsettles others. That small, quiet gesture gives you back respect. Some may criticize you in the moment, but others will notice your firmness and remember it. Respect is not always expressed in words, but it is imprinted in the memory of those who witness it. Being respected does not mean being harsh or arrogant. It means being clear about your boundaries, honest in your words, consistent in your actions. The one who seeks approval fears conflict. The one who seeks respect knows that conflict is sometimes inevitable and faces it calmly. You don't need to shout to be respected. You need consistency. You don't need to please. You need truth. In daily life, this translates into simple but powerful acts. Saying no when something robs you of dignity, remaining calm when provoked, working with discipline even if no one acknowledges it, acting with justice even when it is unpopular. Each of these decisions, repeated, builds respect. Approval can give you a moment of relief, but respect gives you a foundation for life. The one who seeks to be liked becomes worn out. The one who seeks respect grows stronger, and though the path of respect is lonelier, it is also the only one that allows you to sleep in peace with yourself. The desire for approval is an invisible chain. It does not hurt like iron, it does not weigh like stone, but it conditions every gesture, every word, every decision. It is the voice that whispers, "Don't say that, they won't like you. Better do what's expected so there won't be problems. Change your opinion or you'll be left out." That voice disguises itself as prudence, but in reality it is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of isolation, fear of not being loved. And yet, what kind of life is built on fear? A borrowed life, not your own. Respect, on the other hand, is the fruit of freedom. The freedom to speak clearly without wounding unnecessarily, but without pretending. The freedom to choose your path, even if it is unpopular. The freedom to put your principles above social approval. In Stoic terms, it means living according to virtue, because what depends on you is your judgment, your action, your intention. Everything else, including applause, is external and therefore indifferent. Seneca was accused of inconsistency many times. He lived with wealth and at the same time preached austerity. His critics called him a hypocrite, and what did he do? He did not waste energy defending himself against rumors, but reflected on his responsibility. He knew that true respect does not come from responding to every criticism, but from remaining firm in what is essential. He himself wrote, "What matters much more is what your conscience says of you than what others think." When you choose respect over approval, you also choose a slower, sturdier life. Applause is loud but fleeting. Respect is quiet but enduring. It is like the difference between fireworks and a hearth fire. One dazzles for an instant and disappears. The other warms, comforts, and remains. In daily practice, this can be as simple as not over-justifying your decisions. Are you going to say no? Do so calmly and firmly, without endless excuses. Are you going to share your opinion? Do it without disguising it, just to be liked. Are you going to act? Let your actions follow your reason, not the applause. Over time, those around you will know that your word is clear and your presence reliable, and that, even if not everyone likes it, generates respect. Respect also has an invisible component, self-respect. No one can respect someone who does not first respect themselves. If you sell yourself out for cheap approval, you teach others they can demand anything of you. But if you value yourself enough to hold a boundary, you project a strength that is felt even without words. Epictetus put it bluntly, if you want others to respect you, respect yourself first. The difference between being approved and being respected is the difference between living on a stage or living in your own home. On stage you look flawless, but only while the performance lasts. At home you are yourself without masks, and there peace is built. If you choose approval, you will end up exhausted, always chasing expectations that change with the wind. If you choose respect, even if not everyone understands you, you will have gained the most important thing, your own esteem, and with it, the freedom to be. The Stoic invitation is clear. Do not live to be liked, live to be whole. Do not strive to be charming to everyone. Strive to be just, prudent, courageous, and temperate. That constancy will ensure that sooner or later, even those who do not applaud recognize your strength. And if they do not, it matters little, because the respect that matters most is the one you owe yourself. Ninth Stoic lesson, do not confuse patience with submission. There is a common mistake that silently destroys the lives of many, believing that patience is the same as accepting everything, that enduring is always a virtue, even when the price is your dignity. How many times have you heard phrases like, be patient, things will change on their own. It's better not to say anything, that way you won't cause problems. Just hold on a little longer, it will surely work out. Yet behind such advice often hides a trap, submission disguised as virtue. The Stoics valued patience as an expression of temperance, not as a license to be trampled upon. Patience is active resistance, not defeated passivity. It is the strength that allows you to wait for the right moment to act without rushing or yielding to impulse. But that strength becomes weakness when you use it as an excuse not to set boundaries, not to speak up, not to stop what is unjust. Then patience ceases to be a virtue and becomes a chain. Seneca explained this harshly in his treatise on the happy life. It is not the happy man who submits to fate as a slave, but he who embraces it as his own work. That phrase sums up the difference well. Patience is accepting what does not depend on you and acting calmly upon what does. Submission, on the other hand, is accepting everything without distinction, even what you could change. The slave is silent because he has no choice. The wise man waits, but he waits with open eyes and firm will. Think of a river. Patience is like a dam that regulates the flow. It contains the force, directs it, harnesses it. Submission is a broken barrier. The water overflows, destroys, and drags everything away. One thing is to wait for the right moment. Another very different thing is to let the current carry you aimlessly. Epictetus also warned about this. For him, what mattered was discernment. To endure a minor offense in order not to waste energy on useless arguments may be patience, but to tolerate systematic abuse, to remain silent before blatant injustice, to accept mistreatment as if it were inevitable, that is not patience, that is surrender. And he who surrenders ceases to govern himself. In everyday life, the confusion between patience and submission appears in small scenes. When you remain silent out of fear of causing offense, though inside you know you should speak. When you excuse someone who hurts you with phrases like, that's just how they are, instead of setting a boundary. When you endlessly postpone a necessary decision, convinced that the perfect moment will come. True patience helps you wait without collapsing, but always standing tall, with a clear gaze and an active mind. Submission, on the other hand, shrinks your soul, reducing you to a spectator of your own life. The Stoics were neither compliant nor passive. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, spent sleepless nights writing his meditations to remind himself that he needed to be patient with the mistakes of others. But that patience did not make him complicit in injustice. He knew his duty was to correct, to govern, to decide. Patience made him steadfast, not servile. Here lies the nuance we need to learn. Patience is a virtue only when accompanied by justice and courage. Otherwise, it is a mask for fear. The wise man waits because he knows when to act. The coward waits because he fears to act. The result, though outwardly the same, a silence, a pause, feels completely different inside. One strengthens, the other degrades. When you feel you are enduring too much, ask yourself, does what I call patience make me freer or bind me more? Does it give me serenity or does it rob me of dignity? If the answer is the latter, then it is not patience, it is submission, and the time has come to cut that cord. If you look at your life with honesty, you will see many times when you use the word patience as a shield to avoid confronting what was harming you. Perhaps you endured an unfair job thinking that virtue meant putting up with it. Perhaps you tolerated mistreatment from someone close believing that silence was nobility. Perhaps you accepted responsibilities that were not yours with the excuse that one must be patient. But in truth, you confused virtue with fear, temperance with resignation. The Stoics insisted that virtue never degrades. Seneca repeated it clearly. No one bears what must be borne more firmly than he who understands that to endure does not mean to submit, but to choose with resolve. The detail lies in that word, choose. Patience is active because you choose not to react yet. You choose to wait for the right moment. You choose not to be dragged by impulse. Submission, on the other hand, is passive. You do not choose, you resign, you hide. That is why the key is to recognize that authentic patience carries a limit within it. It is not infinite nor given to just anyone. The wise man is patient before what is inevitable, a storm, an illness, a loss, but not before repeated injustice or permitted abuse. There he draws the line, because he knows patience does not oblige him to endure the intolerable. Epictetus taught the distinction between what depends on you and what does not. To be patient with what you cannot change is sensible. If it rains, if you grow old, if someone thinks differently. But to accept as fate what you could change, a mistreatment, a corrosive relationship, a damaging habit, is a betrayal of your own reason. And when you betray your reason, you give away your hegemonicon, your ruling center, the only thing that truly belongs to you. Marcus Aurelius, even in his role as emperor, asked for patience with difficult men, with the insolent, with the ungrateful. But he never understood that patience as complicity. He corrected, legislated, made firm decisions. Patience did not mean allowing the empire to sink, but ruling it with clarity, without hatred and without haste. That is the lesson we must preserve. Patience must uphold justice, not replace it. Now think of yourself. How many times have you said, "It will pass," to excuse someone who crosses your boundaries? How many times have you swallowed words burning in your throat just to avoid conflict? How many times have you waited for miracles instead of acting? Misunderstood patience is the perfect disguise for fear. The person who remains silent too long ends up losing their voice. And when you lose your voice, you lose your inner life. Prolonged submission becomes habit. At first, it is just a gesture, not answering, not defending yourself, not speaking up. Then it becomes a way of life, always yielding, always silencing, always relegating your dignity. And that habit makes you unrecognizable to yourself, someone who walks hunched over even when no chains are visible. Patience, on the other hand, is a habit of greatness. It waits, yes, but waits standing tall, with head held high. The Stoics never confused meekness with cowardice. Seneca, in his treatise on anger, said that he who controls his fury is stronger than he who wins 1,000 battles. But he also warned that letting yourself be trampled is not virtue, but weakness disguised as calm. The wise man may smile at a passing insult, but he does not deliver himself to the executioner with gratitude. Patience has a limit. It is called justice. So, If you want to train this lesson in your life, begin by asking yourself each night, was I patient today, or was I submissive? Was my silence strength, or was it fear? Was my waiting strategy, or was it abandonment? That distinction may seem subtle, but it defines your freedom, because patience is self-rule, while submission is letting someone else rule you. Always remember that Stoic virtue does not ask you to bow your head before what is unjust, but to lift your gaze with serenity. Do not confuse endurance with courage. True courage lies in bearing what is inevitable, but also in putting a stop to what is intolerable. Patience without justice is not virtue, it is renunciation. And you were not born to renounce yourself. You were born to inhabit your life with dignity. 10th Stoic lesson. To love with boundaries is to love better. To love does not mean to give yourself away until you vanish. Even though we were raised with the idea that love endures all, forgives all, and withstands all, the Stoics invite us to see it differently. Authentic love needs boundaries, because without them it turns into dependence, into emotional slavery, into a source of pain rather than virtue. Not setting boundaries is not proof of love, it is proof of fear, and fear is always the enemy of inner freedom. Seneca warned that true affection cannot confuse devotion with servitude. A healthy bond requires clarity, love as if you could lose. That phrase reminds us that love must not absorb your entire identity, because the day the other leaves or fails you, you cannot disappear with them. The boundary then protects your center, your logos, and allows you to remain yourself even as you share your life with another. Think about it. How many times have you said yes in the name of love when inside your soul was screaming no? How many times have you accepted humiliations, abuses, disproportionate demands, convinced that giving in was the way to keep the relationship alive? In reality, the only thing you were doing was mortgaging your dignity. And when love demands the sacrifice of your dignity, it is no longer love, it is submission. Boundaries in love do not cool the bond, they protect it. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, spoke of the importance of not being dragged by excessive passions, even in affection. Because when love turns into passion without measure, it destroys whatever it touches. By contrast, when it is balanced with reason and temperance, love becomes a creative force. It inspires, it accompanies, it elevates. A boundary does not mean cold distance, but clarity in how you relate. It implies saying, I love you, but I will not allow you to abuse me. I care for you, but I will not let your chaos destroy my peace. I walk with you, but I will not give up my identity to sustain yours. That kind of love, far from being selfish, is the only one capable of lasting, because love without boundaries ends up exhausted, while love with boundaries finds a channel to keep flowing. In your daily life, training this principle means learning to examine where your love becomes destructive sacrifice. Ask yourself, am I yielding out of virtue or out of fear? Do my concessions make me grow or diminish me? Does my patience strengthen the bond, or does it turn it into a cage? The honest answer will be the compass that shows you whether your love is grounded in virtue or in submission. To love with boundaries also means accepting the individuality of the other. You cannot merge completely with someone and expect a healthy bond to grow from it. Stoicism teaches you to recognize that each person is an autonomous world with their own reason, freedom, and choices. To love wisely is to accompany without suffocating, to be present without erasing yourself, to care without controlling. The paradox is that when you establish boundaries, love grows, because it ceases to be a burden and becomes a choice. The day you understand that you can live without someone, your decision to stay by their side gains real weight. It no longer comes from fear, but from freedom, and love that is chosen in freedom is stronger than any union born from blind attachment. There is a false idea repeated like an echo in songs, films, and popular advice. If you truly love, you give everything. But Seneca warned that he who gives everything without measure soon has nothing left to offer. The boundary, far from being the enemy of love, is its condition of possibility, because without it, love becomes a fire that consumes itself. Love without limits does not strengthen, it sickens. You end up drained, resentful, trapped in a cycle where giving and giving produces not gratitude, but more demands. Just as a river needs banks so as not to overflow and become a flood, love needs clear boundaries to be fertile and steady. The boundary is that bank which allows affection to flow without destruction. Stoic love does not idealize, does not get lost in illusions. It looks at the beloved with lucidity, accepts them with virtues and flaws, but also recognizes when their actions cross the line that wounds reason or dignity. And in that moment, the boundary is not an act of coldness, but of justice, because no one who loves truly should ask you to renounce who you are in order to sustain the bond. To love with boundaries means knowing how to say no in the midst of passion. It means remembering that your time, your energy, and your peace are also sacred. Not every sacrifice is a virtue. Many are chains we impose on ourselves out of fear of loneliness. But, as Epictetus reminded us, no one who depends on another is free. And if your love depends on accepting everything without measure, what you live is not love, but emotional slavery. Ask yourself, what kind of love am I cultivating? One that makes me greater, or one that reduces me? One that inspires me, or one that wears me down? The answer is the compass for training temperance in your bonds. For love without reflection is mere instinct. Love with philosophy becomes an art of living. In practice, loving with boundaries can be as simple as not answering a message that demands your attention at any hour of the day, or as firm as refusing a favor you know will drain your energy without true purpose. It can mean walking away from a conversation filled with insults, or saying with serenity, "I love you, but I will not tolerate this treatment." These kinds of gestures, though small, mark the difference between a life dragged by external demands and a life guided by reason. A boundary, moreover, does not oppose affection. On the contrary, it reinforces it. When someone loves you and respects your boundaries, that love becomes more authentic. They know your yes is true because you also know how to say no. They know your companionship is free because you also know how to be alone. That clarity prevents love from turning into a game of manipulation or dependence and transforms it into an act of shared freedom. Seneca died teaching by example that dignity stands above fear. His final lesson was to remind us that no love is worth having if it demands that you renounce your deepest self. To love with boundaries is to love with firmness and with justice. Firmness not to yield to what destroys, justice to care for both the other and yourself. To love with boundaries is to love better. The day you learn to love in this way, you will feel that love does not diminish you, but completes you. It will give you calm instead of anxiety, companionship instead of dependence, clarity instead of storm. The boundary does not chill, it gives form. And that form is what makes love lasting, healthy, and truly human. The art of setting boundaries without guilt. There is no harsher prison than the one you build with your own yes. That yes you utter while your chest tightens and your mind screams the opposite. That yes, born not of virtue, but of fear. Fear of displeasing, of disappointing, of losing a place that perhaps was never yours. With every concession, you give away a piece of yourself, and you do it under the illusion that the other will recognize you, thank you, love you more. But life has its harshness. Almost never does it happen. What does happen is that you are left empty, resentful, and silently at war with yourself. A boundary is not a wall you raise against others. It is the minimum ground where you can still breathe. And if you don't protect it, someone else will invade it without even asking permission. There lies the uncomfortable truth. They don't take from you, you hand it over. They don't crush you, you bend. They don't steal your peace, You abandon it when you choose to appease. What would happen if just once you refused to abandon it? Guilt always appears, like a learned echo. If I say no, I'll lose them. If I set a limit, they'll think I'm selfish. That voice is not yours, it is borrowed. It is the invisible chain of an upbringing that confused virtue with servitude. Seneca knew it when he wrote that we lose more through fear than through reality itself. You will lose more life running from discomfort than facing it. And the question is simple, brutal, and final. How much more of your life are you willing to give away just to avoid disturbing anyone? Picture your tomorrow. You wake up and your schedule is no longer written solely by others, but by your own judgment. Your time is not currency, it is an altar. And before every request, you choose, not because you hate, but because you love what must be protected, your peace, your energy, your purpose. The first time you say no with serenity, you will feel a strange emptiness, as if you had betrayed a long habit. But as you look closely at yourself, you will discover something new, dignity, that feeling of standing upright even when your legs tremble. Epictetus taught that true slavery is not that of chains, but of the soul that does not know how to refuse. And in every boundary lies the possibility of freedom. Not some grandiose freedom, but the most intimate kind, the freedom of sleeping without resentment against yourself. I want to leave you with a thought that wounds and liberates. The day your life ends, it will not be others who pay for the hours you gave away. It will be you, with your time spent on complicit silences, on forced favors, on concessions that were never love, only fear. No one else will bear that debt. What if you remembered that truth now, while you can still choose differently? Setting boundaries is not the end of your relationships. It is the beginning of the real ones, because whoever truly loves you will be grateful for your clarity more than for your compliance. The one who leaves because they can no longer use your time or energy was never with you. They were with your weakness. The one who stays after your no deserves your yes. This session does not seek to hand you easy phrases, but to open a conscious wound. What life are you living, yours or that of those who refuse to walk in your shoes? How many more times will you say yes when you can't? How many more days will you spend sustaining the unsustainable? Perhaps you don't have all the answers today. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you leave here with one certainty. Every boundary set with temperance is an act of justice toward yourself. And without justice toward yourself, there can be no justice toward anyone. So don't leave with a light calm. Leave with unease. Leave with that question nailed in. What will I lose if I keep yielding? And what will I gain if today, for the first time, I decide to stand whole? Time, Seneca said, is the most fragile and the most wasted of goods. Do not allow your life to dissolve in the guilt of protecting what truly does not matter. Choose to guard your center. Choose to disturb if necessary. Choose at last to be the master of your yes and your no. Because when you learn to set boundaries without guilt, what you truly learn is how to live without chains. Your voice is essential here. Every reflection strengthens and elevates our community, reflecting the true value of each individual and contributing to our shared Stoic identity. The reflection that receives the most support will be set as the standard of this community of Stoic minds, a community that does not flee from pain but walks through it with courage, with wisdom, with honor. We will see each other in our next gathering at Stoicism for Winners, where we will continue exploring the riches of Stoic wisdom applied to modern life. Now, take the opportunity to deepen your Stoic practice with new recommended podcast sessions. Follow us so you don't miss any reflection that could help you at just the moment when everything feels overwhelming. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish episodes designed to accompany you when life feels heavy, when it's hard to stay calm, when you need a word to remind you who you are. Not following us is to risk missing exactly that lesson that could bring back the peace you have been seeking. Until we meet again, remember, you are the sole owner of your perception, the creator of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. This is the legacy of Stoicism, the art of being invincible.